Many years ago, when I first started blacksmithing, one of the first things I made was a shovel to use in the coal forge. This thing's getting kind of sad and burned up because I frequently use it to heat small parts like wood screws, things like that, so I can wax them and get them to color match the rest of my work. So it is all chewed up, burned up, and in desperate need of replacing. I'll probably put this somewhere to store it because it was one of the things I made in the first few months that I started blacksmithing. So I'm still glad to have it around, and I'm still glad that more than 30 years later, it is still a useful tool, even if it is in kind of rough shape. I'm John Switzer. Welcome back to Black Bear Forge. Somebody out there is thinking, aren't you filming this in September? Isn't it still summer? It is, and a couple of days ago it was 94 degrees out, but this morning it is 38 degrees in the shop. The night before last we had over a foot of snow, so the weather in Colorado can always be exciting, and we were really glad to have the moisture, so I'm not complaining about it. And it'll be back up into the 80s again by this time next week. Anyways, back to this shovel. The size isn't bad on this. I'm going to make something of a similar size. Typically, my fireplace shovels look something like this. This one's got a little refinement yet to go, but I think this is smaller than I want. I don't just want a fireplace shovel, and I want it heavier. So I'm going to use this saw blade material, and we've looked at using this before. This is big, heavy bandsaw from a sawmill in the Pacific Northwest, and I've got a stash of this. And it's thicker than most of the other sheet metal that I have that I can make a shovel out of. Plus it's a higher carbon, so that means it'll be more rigid and will last longer as long as I don't heat it up. The higher carbon will burn faster than the lower carbon mild steel. So one of these days I will probably also make a replacement for this that's just for heating those small parts, and then the shovel doesn't do double duty, it's just a shovel, and this should then last the rest of my blacksmithing career. For the handle, I think we're going to start with some 5/8 square bar, so this is roughly 16 millimeter square bar or something like that. And I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to split the end to mount to the shovel so it has a more secure mount, and then draw out the handle, thinning it in the handle area. And this is something you see in the book, The Modern Blacksmith, at least I think that's what it's called. I'll try and get a picture of that and put it on here, so if you're looking for the book, you can find it. It won't be an exact duplicate of the one in the book, it's just inspired by that, and I'm not going to refer back to the book while I make it, and that way it stays a little bit more original. Because it is cold, we're going to work in the gas forge. It puts a little bit more heat into the shop. The first thing to do then is to normalize or anneal the saw blade so it will be easier to cut out. My little bandsaw is still down. I had to take it apart to do some repairs on it. One way or the other, we can find a way to get this cut out. So that gets our blank all cut out. I just went ahead and did it all with angle grinders. It was pretty quick and efficient. The fact that this is a higher carbon steel means it's kind of hard on the blades for the Beverly shear, so I decided not to use that. But whatever tools you have, you can do all this with a chisel if you need to. Heck, you can do a lot of this with a hacksaw. It's just a whole lot of work that way. But taking the time to at least normalize and preferably anneal the saw blade makes it a lot softer and easier to cut. So the next thing we're going to do is take this over to the forge, and we're going to forge the shovel pan out of this. And for that, I think I'm going to use that giant chain link that people see in the background and sitting on the floor sometimes and always ask, what do you use that chain link for? Well, this is the kind of thing I use that chain link for. So let's get that out, let's light the forge back up, and let's make ourselves a shovel. A big piece of sheet metal like this puts off a lot of radiant heat, so that would be a good time to think about wearing gloves while you're working. This just takes a little bit of time. It cools off quickly, so keep going back and forth and use whatever you have for a form. We've in the past looked at using the bottom of gas cylinders as a form for things like this. A wooden block could be a good form. Some swedge blocks have decent forms to work shovels into. Whatever you got, just make use of the tools you have on hand. This just happens to be ideal for this kind of stuff. As the shovel pan starts to take shape, I'll come back to the anvil and I'll flatten up what needs to be flattened, straighten some things out. This old hitch ball that fits in my Pritchell hole makes a pretty good forming tool, so it's a real handy thing to have. I'm going to let this cool, and then I'll clean some of this up with a grinder and maybe do a little bit of work on it cold to refine some of the areas that have little oddities in them there. It's generally no problem to do a little straightening on these shovel blades cold. However, in this case, because this is a higher carbon steel, I have to be careful not to do too much without heating it. But you do have a little bit more control over the thin material if it's cold than if it's hot. And the flat horn on this double horn anvil is a great place to do some of that straightening. Looks like it has a little bit of a twist in it, so I'll have to probably heat it up, put this in a vise, and then try to straighten it. Hopefully this fits in one of my vices. So sometimes it just takes some fiddling and fussing and you can eventually get the shape you want for the shovel pan. You don't need a lot of fancy jigs or swedges or anything like that. The chain link is nice, but the oxygen cylinder works, a wood stump works, and you can probably figure something else out if you don't have any of that stuff. You can do this. The shovel I'm replacing was just done over the anvil because I didn't have any of these things back then. I had forge, hammer, anvil, and a vise, and that was it. So while that cools, I'm going to turn my attention to the handle. And what I'm going to do with this, I'm going to draw it out kind of thin in the middle here, make it flat. I'm not going to draw out a taper. I'm just going to flatten it in the middle and maybe 8 inches long, something like that. And then I'm going to peen it wide, still going to be flat, but it's going to be wider. And that wide section is where I'm going to put the wooden grips on this. And maybe I'll leave something on the end to punch a hole in so it can hang on a nail if need be. Kind of doing this free form. I don't know exactly what it's going to look like. We'll see when we get done. Now you can do all of that drawing out at the anvil. There's no reason you can't do it that way. It's certainly possible. If I'm going to take a half an hour to draw that out at the anvil, I'm not going to show you every step of the way. I'll show you the beginning, I'll show you the end. And with that in mind, a power hammer will save me some time in my day if I do it that way. So that's probably what I'll do. And I'll show a little bit of that as well as some of it at the anvil. If you don't have the power hammer, do it all at the anvil. Just plan to spend a little bit more time and get a little bit more exercise. First thing I want to do is create a slot in here so I can spread that 2 ways, and I'll rivet to both sides of that pan instead of in line like I typically do for a fireplace shovel. I think that'll be a little bit stronger for the coal shovel. And to do that, I'm going to start by drilling a small hole in here so I have a nice radius at the back of the split. Then I'm just going to cut it with an angle grinder so it's nice and clean. And just for the sake of doing something a little bit different, I'm going to use a spring fuller to fuller in where I want my transition to be. You can certainly do this under the guillotine tool. Lots of different ways you can do it. This is just the tool I happen to choose today. I want to establish the transition point here over the anvil where I've got a little bit more control. Then I'll go to the horn for some more aggressive drawing out. course, we can do all that spreading out at the anvil, just like we can do the drawing out at the anvil. This section will become the ring so that I can hang this if I ever decide it needs to be hung up somewhere. Well, it ended up not quite lining up over the bolster, but it's still sheared out nicely, so there's a little slug. By the way, this is leftover wax from waxing projects at the anvil, which is a good reason not to use your anvil to put that final coat of wax on. And I'll start drawing this ring out over the cone mandrel here. Speaking of cone mandrels, have you seen Torbjorn Amand's latest video on making a cone mandrel? I was really excited about that video, both because it was a really good video, but he also gave me a very nice shout out. So thank you, Torbjorn, for that shout out. I really appreciate it. Actually saw a little spike in our subscriber growth. So if you're here at Black Bear Forge because you saw that video, thanks for checking it out. We'll have lots of videos in the future. Sometimes I think of my vise as an adjustable bolster. It can often be a real problem solver if you're having trouble getting odd-shaped pieces in so you can drive a punch or drift through. And as it gets larger, the horn of the anvil is probably the best place to do this kind of work. That's all I want to do to this end for now. That'll need some filing or grinding, and this handle part where the wood slabs will go will need some filing and grinding without a doubt. But I think I want to turn my attention to the part that the shovel is going to go onto. I'm going to let this cool so I can hold it in my hand, and we'll spread that, clean that up a little bit, and that'll pretty much be done. I'm opening this up using a fuller so that I don't get a sharp cut at the bottom. I want a nice transition at the bottom of this split. And then we'll go ahead and draw these out. Now this is going to have to kick up a little bit. I don't want the handle pointing down, so I want to bring it up like that. To do that, I think I'm going to upset this end a little bit and get it to just start to lean over that way. I hope that works the way I envision it. It may or may not. We'll see. Well, that worked pretty well. That's kind of what I was going for. The only problem, and it's what I was afraid of, is that there's a little bit of a kink in here now that might become a cold shut if I'm not careful. That doesn't exist on the other side. I didn't upset, so that's just a result of doing that little bit of upsetting. But I think if I'm careful, I can avoid that being a problem. I don't know how much of that I really got on the camera. It seems like one camera, the card was full, and the other one just quit recording sometime before I was through with the last steps. So what I've done is I've curved this a little bit, and I've got this shape so it fits the back of the shovel pan. And I'm pretty happy with the way that looks. There may be a little adjusting after I do some grinding on it. I want to make this a pretty neat and clean forging. I don't want it rough forged, so it's going to get some grinding and cleaning up. And I have to smooth up this section that will become the handle with the wood grips so that those can be epoxied on cleanly and securely. The shovel pan will also need a little bit of grinding. They're always a little bit irregular, and some sort of trimmings in order most of the time if you want a nice clean shovel pan. So I'm going to do that. And I think we'll save all that for a part 2 video. So if you want to see what this shovel looks like fully assembled and completed, you'll have to tune into part 2, and hopefully I'll have that maybe middle of the week as sort of a bonus video. If you would like to see ad-free versions of some of my videos, those are now being made available over on the Patreon site for certain levels of contribution through my Patreon patrons. So if you'd like to support the channel financially and don't want to watch those ads, that's the place to check out, and there's a link down in the video description for that. But for everybody, I do hope you enjoyed the video. Give it a thumbs up if you did. If you haven't done so already, I would love it if you hit that subscribe button down there. Feel free to stick around, watch a few of the other videos, share the videos with your friends. Then by all means, make time in your day to get out to your shop. Make something, stay safe, wear your safety glasses. We'll see you for the next one.